53 years old, and I've spent the last 22 years making sure that when a patient is wheeled into surgery at Meridian Regional Medical Center, the drugs in that OR are exactly what they're supposed to be. Not close, not approximately. Exactly. My name doesn't matter much in this story. What matters is my title, Pharmacy Systems Custodian and Compliance Administrator, which sounds bureaucratic and boring until you understand what it actually means. I am the person whose credentials are hardwired into Meridian's DEA and FDA pharmacy license. I am the named individual on every federal dispensing authorization this hospital holds. 22 years of audits, renewals, inspections, and 0 violations. Not one. The kind of record that takes 2 decades to build and about 6 hours to destroy. The hospital's ownership group, a private equity firm out of Atlanta, had run Meridian like a well-oiled machine for most of those years. The CEO, a man I'll call my boss, was old school. He understood that a hospital isn't a tech startup. He understood that compliance isn't a suggestion. He shook my hand every year in my review and said the same thing. You're the one person I can't afford to lose. I believed him. That was my first mistake. His son joined the organization 18 months ago. I want to be careful about how I describe him, because I don't want to sound like a bitter old woman who just can't handle change. I've handled plenty of change. I migrated this hospital through 3 different pharmacy management platforms, 2 DEA regulatory overhauls, and a complete EMR transition. I know what real change looks like, and I know what performance looks like, and what the owner's son brought was neither. He was 29, fresh MBA from a school in the Southeast that I won't name. His official title was Vice President of Digital Transformation. In practice, his job was to walk around with a tablet, sit in on department meetings he had no background to understand, and generate slide decks with words like frictionless, scalable, and legacy elimination. He wore the kind of glasses that cost $400 and are actually prescription. I noticed that detail about 2 weeks in. The first time he sat in on my compliance review meeting, he spent 40 minutes on his phone and then asked, at the end, whether our system architecture could be migrated to the cloud. I explained, slowly and without condescension. I want credit for that. That federal pharmacy systems operating under DEA Schedule II controls cannot simply be migrated to a commercial cloud environment. That there are Title 21 CFR Part 1334 requirements. That the FDA has specific data residency mandates for controlled substance dispensing records. That none of this is optional. He looked at me the way young people sometimes look at older women who use the word mandate seriously. Like I was a piece of furniture, explaining why it couldn't be moved. We'll circle back, he said. That was October. By January, he had been given signing authority over IT infrastructure spending. By February, he had hired a consulting firm, 3 people his own age, to assess digital redundancies. I was not asked to participate in the assessment. I found out about it when one of the consultants showed up at my office door and asked me to walk him through our legacy pharmacy architecture so he could identify sunset candidates. I walked him through it. I showed him everything. I explained the custodian credential structure. I showed him the FDA registration portal where my name, my DEA registration number, and my digital certificate were the anchor points for every controlled substance authorization Meridian held. I told him plainly that if anything happened to those credentials, if they were revoked, transferred, or orphaned, an automated compliance check would trigger within the FDA's controlled substance ordering system within 24 hours. And when that check failed to find a verified custodian, the system would flag the license for review. And when a license went into review status, all dispensing authorizations attached to it were automatically suspended, pending investigation. He typed something into his laptop. I don't know what. What I do know is that he reported back to the owner's son that our pharmacy compliance infrastructure was single-threaded and represented a key person dependency risk. Which was accurate. I had been saying the same thing for 4 years. I had submitted 3 formal requests for a deputy custodian to be trained and credentialed. All 3 requests had been denied on budget grounds. But when a 26-year-old consultant with a Patagonia vest says it, apparently it becomes a strategic priority. The owner's son called a meeting in late February. My boss was there, which surprised me. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. The son had a presentation, 12 slides. The 4th slide had my name on it under a header that said organizational bottlenecks. I sat very still. He talked about key person dependencies. He talked about the risks of having critical institutional knowledge siloed in a single role. He talked about succession planning and knowledge transfer timelines He talked about bringing in a new director of digital pharmacy operations who would absorb the custodian function, modernizing the department. My boss didn't look at me during any of this. When the presentation ended, I asked one question. I asked whether the incoming director of digital pharmacy operations had DEA custodian credentials. There was a pause. The son looked at one of his consultants. The consultant checked his laptop. That would be part of the onboarding process, the son said. How long does that process take? I asked. We'd work with HR on a timeline. The DEA custodian credentialing process, I said, takes a minimum of 90 days from application submission. During that window, the current custodian must remain active on the license. That's a federal requirement, not a preference. Another pause. We'll factor that in, he said. I went back to my office. I called my attorney. I want to be honest about that. I didn't sit quietly and assume everything would work out. I am 53 years old, and I have watched too many competent women get managed out of organizations by men half their age who couldn't pass a state pharmacy board exam. I knew what "will factor that in" meant. I started documenting everything that afternoon. The offer came 2 weeks later. They called it a transition package, 18 months of salary, continued health benefits through the end of the year, a letter of reference. It was a good offer. It was designed to be a good offer. It was designed to make me sign something, shake hands, and disappear before anyone noticed the 90-day credentialing gap. I did not sign. I told HR I needed time to review the package with my attorney. They said that was fine. They gave me 2 weeks. My attorney told me I had leverage I hadn't fully appreciated yet. I sat on it. What happened next wasn't something I planned. It was something I watched happen. The owner's son, apparently frustrated by my refusal to simply exit gracefully, went around HR. On a Thursday afternoon in March, he submitted an IT service ticket to revoke my system administrator credentials in the pharmacy management platform. He routed it through the new consulting firm so it would bypass the normal change management review. The ticket was processed at 4:47 p.m. My access was revoked at 4:51 p.m. I found out at 5:00 true p.m. when I tried to log in to approve the evening medication reconciliation queue and got an account suspended message. I want to tell you what happened at 5 a.m. the following morning, which is when the FDA's automated CSOS compliance verification runs. It found that Meridian Regional Medical Centers named Pharmacy Systems Custodian had no active system credentials. My DEA registration number was still attached to the license. My name was still in the federal registration, but my access to the systems I was registered to oversee had been administratively severed. The CSOS flagged the discrepancy. By 6:15 a.m., Meridian's pharmacy dispensing authorizations were in suspended pending review status. By 6:30 a.m., the overnight charge pharmacist was on the phone with the State Board of Pharmacy because the dispensing system was throwing compliance errors on every controlled substance order in the queue. By 7 a.m., 3 scheduled surgeries, a cardiac bypass, an elective hip replacement, and a pediatric procedure I won't describe in detail because the family deserves privacy were placed on hold. You cannot perform those procedures without the anesthesia protocols. You cannot legally dispense the anesthesia medications when your federal dispensing authorization is suspended. My phone rang at 7:23 a.m. It was my boss. He didn't say hello. He said, "I need you to come in." I said, "I need you to come in." I said, "I don't currently have system access." Silence. "I know," he said. "I'm going to fix that." With respect, I said, the DEA and FDA don't work on the same timeline as an IT service ticket. Reinstating my credentials won't automatically clear the compliance flag. I need to submit a custodian verification request through the federal portal, which requires supporting documentation, and then someone on their end has to process it. That takes time. How much time depends on who's working that morning. More silence. "What do you need?" he asked. I had thought about this. I had thought about it since October, if I'm being honest. Not in a revenge way. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a person who fantasizes about watching things burn, but I am a person who understands leverage, and I had spent 5 months watching leverage accumulate on my side of the table without anyone in that building seeming to notice. "I need a few things," I said. "First, I need my transition package voided and replaced with a new employment agreement, 5-year term. Market rate compensation for a senior compliance administrator, which I'll define as the 75th percentile for this region. I can send you the Bureau of Labor Statistics benchmarks. Full benefits. And I need the deputy custodian training program I've been requesting for 4 years to be funded and initiated within 60 days. He didn't say anything. "Second," I said, I need written confirmation that the revocation of my credentials on Thursday afternoon will be documented as an unauthorized administrative action. I'm not asking for anyone to be fired. I'm asking for an accurate record. And third, he asked. I could hear that he knew there was a third. The consulting contract with your son's firm gets terminated. I'll work with whatever internal team you assign, but I won't rebuild this compliance infrastructure, while the people who dismantled it are still billing you $400 an hour to watch. He asked me if I could come in at 9. I said yes. I want to tell you about the drive-in, because I think it's the part of the story that people don't expect. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't angry anymore, really. Mostly I was tired. 22 years is a long time to spend in one building, and some part of me had genuinely hoped to spend 5 or 10 more there. Not like this. Not with an attorney on speed dial and a documented paper trail of every conversation since October. When I walked into my boss's office, his son was there. I had not expected that. The son looked like he hadn't slept. His $400 glasses were slightly crooked. He started to say something. I think it was going to be an explanation, and my boss held up his hand and stopped him. "She's not here to listen to you," my boss said. He said it quietly. It was the first time in 18 months I had heard him speak to a son that way. We sat down. His attorney was on speakerphone. My attorney was on my cell phone in my jacket pocket. The conversation took 45 minutes. Every point I had outlined was agreed to. The deputy custodian program got a budget line, real numbers, not a placeholder. The consulting contract termination was drafted while we sat there. The son never spoke directly to me. He looked at the table for most of it. Near the end, he looked up at his father and said something about the process having been mishandled. His father said yes. That was the extent of it. I went back to my workstation. I spent 3 hours on the phone with the FDA's compliance center in Maryland, working through the custodian verification reinstatement. The woman on the other end was patient and professional, and had clearly handled situations like this before, which I found both reassuring and a little depressing. The surgeries were rescheduled. The cardiac bypass went into the OR at 2015 that afternoon. I watched the system clear the dispensing authorization flag at 1:58 p.m. and felt something I can only describe as bone-deep relief. Not for myself, but for the anesthesiologist who'd been waiting, and for the patient who'd already been prepped twice. I'll tell you the part I think about most now. The owner's son resigned about 6 weeks after that. Nobody made him. From what I heard, the board had a conversation with his father about the unauthorized credential revocation. My attorney had made sure the documentation existed in a form the board could not ignore, and the son decided the position wasn't the right fit anymore. He's apparently doing something in fintech now. I hope he's good at it. I genuinely mean that. Some people find the right room eventually. The deputy custodian program enrolled its first candidate in May. A young woman, late 20s, pharmacy operations background, sharp as a tack, who will spend the next 18 months learning everything I know. We eat lunch together twice a week. She asks good questions. She doesn't use the word frictionless. My boss and I don't talk about that morning much. Occasionally he'll stop by my office with a coffee he didn't need to bring and set it on my desk without saying anything, and I take that as the closest thing to an apology. A man of his generation knows how to offer. I've decided it's enough. I still get to my desk by 7:30 every morning. I still run the compliance reports before I do anything else. I still know every line of every federal regulation that governs controlled substance dispensing in this state, and I will know them until the day I choose to leave. On my own terms, on my own timeline, with a credentialed successor sitting in the chair across from mine. The day they revoked my access at 4:51 p.m., they thought they were cutting a loose end. What they actually did was demonstrate to a federal system that doesn't negotiate and doesn't care about org charts that the loose end was the only thing holding the whole structure together. I didn't need to say a word. The compliance report said it for me. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that Thursday afternoon. Not the logistics of it, but the deeper mechanics. A 29-year-old man with a new title and a borrowed vocabulary looked at 22 years of careful, unglamorous work and decided it was a liability. He wasn't malicious in the way people imagine when they hear a story like this. He wasn't twirling a villain's mustache. He genuinely believed that expertise was interchangeable, that credentials were administrative formalities, that the woman who had kept those licenses clean for 2 decades was simply an obstacle wearing the disguise of a department head. That kind of blindness isn't evil. It's something quieter and more common. It's the certainty of someone who has never been responsible for anything that couldn't be undone with a slide deck revision. What I've come to understand is that consequences don't negotiate. The FDA system that flagged our license at 5 a.m. didn't care about org charts. It didn't care about the consulting firm's assessment or the VP of Digital Transformation's quarterly goals. It only asked one question: is the named custodian still active? The answer was no. Everything that followed was just arithmetic. I think about my boss during all of this, a man I genuinely respected, who let his son's confidence outweigh his own better judgment. He knew what I was worth. He said it to my face every year for nearly 2 decades. But knowing something and acting on it are different muscles, and his had gone soft somewhere around the time nepotism became his family's operating strategy. I don't carry bitterness about that. What I carry is a clear-eyed understanding that loyalty to an institution means nothing if the institution won't defend its own foundations. Here is what I believe: stripped of anything dramatic, the outcome of that morning was not luck. It was the result of 22 years of showing up, of never cutting a corner on a compliance report even when nobody was checking, of maintaining a standard that the federal system could verify independently of anyone's opinion of me. That's the only kind of record that holds when someone tries to erase you at 4:51 on a Thursday. You can revoke a person's access. You cannot revoke what they actually know or what their work has already embedded into a system that doesn't forget. There's something else I want to say about the young woman I'm training now. She's sharp and curious and asks the kind of questions that tell me she's thinking 3 steps ahead. When I walk her through the custodian credentialing process, the real reasons behind each requirement, not just the procedural steps, I'm not just transferring information. I'm trying to give her something that took me 2 decades to fully understand: that integrity in technical work is not about being recognized. It's about building something that functions correctly, whether or not anyone is watching. That's not a philosophy I read somewhere. It's what I proved on a Friday morning when 3 surgeries were on hold, and a federal system confirmed in the most impersonal language possible that the work I had done quietly for 22 years was the only reason those authorizations had ever been valid at all. I deleted the first voicemail my boss left me that morning without listening to it. I don't regret that. Some things are worth making people wait for, just long enough to understand the weight of what they almost lost.